Enfield used to be a Fairtrade borough. We gained that status in 2008, but afterwards the campaign lost momentum and eventually we lost our status as well. We were actually in the process of winding things up when Melanie rode into town, guns blazing, and turned things around. So now we're aiming to get our status back again. So now we'll be called a Fairtrade community rather than a Fairtrade borough. Just changed the nomenclature. So, well, EnCaf is about climate change. So what has Fairtrade got to do with climate change? Elaine will be going into more detail about that, but essentially it's all about social justice. We aren't going to tackle climate change without social justice. Poor people who struggle to feed their families can't afford to worry about taking care of the environment. If they need to burn down a bit of rainforest to plant crops, the rainforest will burn. And then when climate change really starts to bite, as indeed it's already starting to do, it'll bite them first and hardest. And many of them, millions of them probably, will head for Europe as their only hope of survival. You can imagine what European governments will make of that. So fair trade is about ensuring that farmers get paid a fair return for their produce. Mel will be going into the details later. What concerns us is that they can only sell at fair trade prices what we buy at this end of the supply chain. In fact, most fair trade cooperatives can only sell a proportion of what they produce at fair trade prices, and the rest has to go on the open market. So our campaign is to get fair trade working into every corner of Enfield life. We won't get our fair trade community status back just from having a lot of shops selling fair trade products, though that is an important bit of it. We also need pubs and restaurants stocking fair trade wine or cooking with fair trade ingredients, places of worship supporting fair trade, ideally as fair trade place to worship, but they don't have to do that. Schools teaching about fair trade and ideally becoming fair trade schools. The council passing a supportive motion, which I'm pleased to say they've already done, and using fair trade products in council buildings such as the Dugdale Centre. And finally, we need workplaces where the staff get their tea and coffee fair trade. So that's where I'm hoping that all of you will come in, both in ensuring that all of that happens in your workplace, in your place of worship, in your children's schools, and also ensuring that we know about it when it does happen. We need publicity too in local newspapers, newsletters, and on social media. It's quite a bit to do, but we think we're up for it. I'm hoping you are. Okay, that's what I've got to say. Now we have this short video.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about is the connection to climate justice specifically. So as Bill set out, I mean, there's a basic point that you can't expect people to take interest in climate change to make changes in how they produce produce because of climate concerns if they are living at an incredibly poor subsistence level, so they don't have any spare resources to devote to that. So that's one very important facet of the contribution that fair trade can make to combating the climate crisis. But there's a bigger issue as well, though, which is that as I think we've seen demonstrated actually by the coronavirus, the kind of the sort of the big multinational involvement in agriculture, the commodification electrification of agriculture, the kind of global market that we've seen accelerate in all sorts, in meat production, but all sorts of other agricultural production, actually accelerating over the last 20 years, is a major driver of climate change in itself, as well as a major driver of pandemic diseases that we're living with now. So by supporting the smaller farmers against the multinationals in the way that the fair trade would do, is actually going to be really important in combating climate crisis, because really that's the only route to getting actually more climate friendly agriculture, kind of by its very nature, in the sense getting it away from the multinationals. So I think that is incredibly important. But I think we have to, and obviously it'd be fantastic if Enfield can be a fair trade community once more. But I think we have to think of it as that's not the end goal. I mean, it's doing our part to move towards a bigger goal. Because if you think about it, I mean, talking about fair trade, it's a misnomer really, because surely all trade should be fair. You shouldn't have a separate box that's fair trade. And what we're talking about here is actually how we are doing, in a small way, trying to put right the global inequalities that exist because of colonialism. You know, these are the legacies of the relationships that were set up by, you know, the British Empire and the Dutch Empire and the German Empire, and so on and so on. You know, it's those fundamental inequalities between the West and the developing world that fair trade is aiming to put right. And again, those inequalities, those behaviors, that extractivism that capitalism does, that is the reason why we're facing the climate crisis. So it's kind of all part of the same thing. So I think it's incredibly important for climate justice that we have the fair trade campaign, and that we have this in Enfield. So I think this is really fantastic. But I think we have to see it as a route to actually much more fundamental system change. You know, it might start here, and engaging people in the kind of, as individual consumers, thinking about what chocolate are they going to choose in the supermarket, is a reasonable way to engage with people. But I don't think it can stop there. So this is with my XR system of change hat on, that I think you won't get entirely fair trade really until you get rid of capitalism. So we can think of it as a very small step on the way to getting rid of capitalism, and thereby saving the climate. Thank you.
I'm going to mirror a lot of what Elaine said, actually, around the issue of fair trade. In the Black Lives Matter movement, fair trade hasn't really been on the agenda as much. I mean, we had a protest in Edmonton, and Bill spoke at that, and I was happy that he brought fair trade into the debate. And I think the reason why it's not been really so much a part of the BLM agenda is for the reasons that Elaine has just set out. It's the reason why we need fair trade in the first place. And in the continent, in Africa, there's still the legacy of colonialism remains, and that's why fair trade exists. They still have, you know, lots of finance systems that are controlled, that go back to the empire, and not just UK empire. I'm talking about the French as well. I was reading something today about the French still having quite a lot of control in some financial institutions in Africa. So yeah, those are the issues that need to be tackled, because we need to look for an actual proper solution. But we do support fair trade, and I think we should be having more debate about it in the Black community. But again, Bill mentioned, you know, Black people suffer disproportionately in terms of poverty-related issues. And so if fair trade products cost a little more in supermarkets, and I completely understand and support the reasons why they do, but that's going to be an issue for a lot of people in our community to kind of engage and start to say they're going to buy fair trade products. Nevertheless, we're going to put that on the agenda and see if we can get a debate about it, about fair trade and about the wider issues that there are in Africa and other places with the legacy of colonialism. In terms of climate change, this is another area where we're working really hard to try and engage Black communities on this issue. And I think, again, for the reasons that Bill laid out, when people are struggling to make ends meet, the planet hasn't really been a top priority. But I think that is starting to change now. And if we look at last year, what we saw in Jamaica, I don't know if any of you saw the footage of, you know, whole buildings sailing away in rivers of flood water, which was a direct result of climate change. And climate change does impact on the poorest parts of the world the most. And so we're having those conversations in our community and we're starting the conversation and we're starting to campaign against it. I just want to talk about just one little mention of the incinerator campaign is where the Black community is getting involved. So we have got a petition. If you can sign that, please do. So we are starting to have these discussions. People have linked climate change and fair trade already. If people have the resources to use clean energy, if people have the resources to have schemes like planting trees, they will do that. It's about them having the right resources, I think. Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it there.
As the video and as Bill has also said, fair trade is about better prices for those who are growing the crops that we eat in the rich world. It's about decent working conditions, about local sustainability. It is chocolate, it is wine, it is footballs, it is wedding rings, it is tea, it is coffee, it's bananas, it's pineapples, it's roses, and it's dismantling the injustices of the global trading infrastructure. It's all of those things at the same time. There are a whole range of fair trade products that have been built up over the years. Fair Trade Foundation was established in 1992, but fairly traded products go back way beyond that, back into the 70s. And also there's fair trade condoms. Now, you didn't think I'd be saying that tonight. So there's a lot of things that are products that come from poorer countries that we buy, that we rely on over in the UK. How do we start our day without a cup of coffee? But as Martin Luther King once said, that before you finish your breakfast, you've relied on half of the world, but half of the world are not as privileged as us, and fair trade seeks to address that. Fair trade increases the standards of living, reduces the risk and vulnerability for farmers and workers. It provides a minimum price as a safety net and protects farmers against price volatility, which means a better cash flow, greater access to credit, and the ability to save more effectively. Fair trade standards are also about democratic leadership. It's not about the big boss. It's about administrative efficiency, transparent accounting, improved governance, all these things that in the West we can sometimes say, oh, well, it's you know, we can dismiss as being problems in other parts of the world, but fair trade helps to guarantee those standards. And it means that the farms are well represented and can trust the leadership that's going on, and better partnerships can grow out of that. It protects basic rights, safe working environment, ability to join a trade union, which is so often not available to people who are doing all the very basic jobs around the world. And it also helps to prevent forced child labour and illegal child labour as well. And there's also all sorts of standards that come in within that as to how much people get paid to make sure that they earn a living wage. We have the Real Living Wage campaign in the UK. Fair trade takes that in a different aspect to different parts of the world. And of course, we've talked, you know, the key thing is about environmental sustainability for us tonight. So many things are looked at within fair trade. We kind of think it's about money, but it's so much more than that. So farmers have to reach a standard for energy and usage and greenhouse gas emission reduction. The soil and water quality and pollution comes into it, pest management and pesticides, having to protect biodiversity, And also, we may be pleased to hear that genetically modified organisms and harmful chemicals are completely prohibited. And it also looks after other waste management techniques. It also fits into the sustainable development goals. It's actually crucial that if we're going to level up the playing field across the globe, that those goals are met. And it goes into sustainable consumption, combating climate change, and sustainable use of ecosystems. So just by finding that little logo on your treat bar of chocolate, you're achieving so much more than getting your chocolate fix. Fairtrade, there's a sense that we kind of hung up with its affordability, and I'll just finish up here, Francis. It cut up with its affordability, but actually Co-op is one of the biggest stockists of Fairtrade, and also Aldi, known to be really cheap, has actually got quite a thorough range of Fairtrade products. It's only more expensive because people traditionally higher up the delivery train get more money. If that is addressed, then it doesn't have to be like that. Fairtrade does not have to be any more expensive than other products. We just need to readdress that balance and level up the playing field. To me, that is what Fairtrade is.
There are 5 criteria that the Fairtrade Foundation laid down for a community to become a Fairtrade community. Firstly, the council must pass a motion which is supporting Fairtrade, which, as I mentioned earlier, they have already done. And then also on top of that, there needs to be within the buildings controlled by the council, there needs to be Fairtrade on sale, for instance, in the cafe at the Dugdale Centre, and I think there's one entry in Edmonton Library as well, and procurement for schools and that sort of thing. The second one is that there should be a number of shops in the borough selling Fairtrade products. It used to be just 2 Fairtrade products. They've now upped the ante, and you have to have 4, and not just 4 products, not just say 4 different types of coffee. You have to have 4 different types of products. So coffee, tea, bananas, chocolate, whatever it might be. And the number of shops that you need for that is dependent on the population of the borough, which has also gone up since 2008. So we need, in fact, 44 shops and also 22 cafes, restaurants, pubs selling or cooking with Fairtrade ingredients. So that's quite a tricky one to address. Last time around, a lot of pavements were pounded as we looked around at all the shops we could find and see what they were selling. Pavements will have to be pounded again. And number 3 is you need workplaces, shops, schools, and so on, using Fairtrade products, people having Fairtrade tea and coffee at their breaks, all that sort of thing. We have media coverage, including social media these days. And finally, a Fairtrade steering group has to be formed. And again, I'm happy to say that that's been done already. We have quite a strong looking Fairtrade steering group, several of whom are on this call. So I'll now pass over to Melanie for a few more details about some of those aspects of things.
starting people young is really key, and educating people right from the start really makes a difference. In terms of schools, well, schools are the thing that's opening first, 8th of March, they're all opening up. But of course, engaging with schools at the moment is really, really tricky. But luckily, there is different level of schools involvement. First of all, schools can look to become what's known as fair aware, and finding out just a little bit about what fair trade is, effectively what I was saying a bit earlier, but addressed at people in a far clearer way than I managed, as teachers always manage to do. And then you can become a fair active school, which is possibly thinking of assemblies, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, investigating different fair trade products, and it does cover a lot of what's on the curriculum to be able to do that. So teachers can be really keen to get help from outside in to look at fair trade, because it ticks a lot of curricular boxes. And then when they know what a school is doing, feels that it's got a bit of confidence, is starting to use some fair trade items, then you can be externally assessed to become a fair achiever, and that's an independent assessment. I will admit that I haven't quite calculated how many schools that we definitely need in Enfield. It's a fair number, but there are some good networks, such as the Enfield Town Schools Partnership, that have agreed to look at that with us, which is really great. With places of worship, it used to be mostly churches that we were looking at, but now you can have a scheme for temples, synagogues, mosques, as well as churches and church areas. And that's got a threefold focus. It's about using, celebrating, and engaging. So use the products, celebrate that like Fair Trade Fortnight, and then engage with others to promote, which, hey, I'm ticking that box tonight. So thank you very much for that opportunity. There is a gargantuan task, over 100 places of worship in Enfield that are obvious. But the really good positive point to come out on is to say we've got actually somebody who had some time because of lockdown and change of jobs, and is actually working through over 100 different places of worship, work out where they all are and who we might be able to work with on that. So, work is getting done. It's not a blank page. There's a lot of things we've ticked off so we can move forward.